All right, we had Alex Swoyer on last week. She was awesome. She wrote that book, Lawless Lawfare, as you already know. And she gave us the skinny on all kinds of legal things going on. That was the good news. The bad news is there's so much freaking going on that we didn't get to like half of the cases that are really important. We covered the same-sex marriage stuff and all the other stuff last week. So let's go back to Alex again. Apparently, we're just going to hire her permanently and talk about these things. Author of the book Lawless Lawfare, Alex Swoyer, joins me. Okay, the court, what are they doing now? What's coming? Normal people like me don't understand this stuff.
Yeah, so right now the justices are on their summer recess, which basically means the end of June to the first week of October, they're out. We get about four updates from them in terms of order lists, cases that they're going to either hear or get rid of. Normally, it's not too newsy until what's called the long conference. And so the long conference is usually the week before they return. They generally meet in private on Thursdays. And so we get a lengthy list the first Monday in October. Any new cases that they might be adding to this term's docket. There's a couple that I'm watching that I can just flag for you. One actually has to do with two Christian schools in Florida who wanted to say a prayer over the loudspeaker, but were not allowed. And so there's 2000, from the year 2000, the Supreme Court had said a school prayer, on the loudspeaker would violate the Establishment Clause. So you have these schools asking the justices to revisit that precedent and rule that they are able to speak freely at the First Amendment. They're both Christian schools. Why would they not be able to say a prayer? Of course, you and I touched last week on the same-sex marriage petition, whether or not the justices will go ahead and take up an opportunity to overturn same-sex marriage when they legalized it in 2015. That case is pending. And then, of course, there's going to be one that I think is going to maybe be the biggest case of the term in terms of precedent that could be overturned, the likelihood that it would be taken. Now, same-sex marriage would be huge if they did that, but most court watchers don't think they're going to take up that case. But this one has to do with Trump's ability to fire agency heads, these independent agency heads. He's already had to come to the Supreme Court a few times trying to remove some Biden appointees to like the National Labor Relations Board, the Consumer Product Safety Board, all of this. So there's like a 1935 case where the Supreme Court basically limited the president's power to fire these type of people at will, saying that there has to be some sort of independence from these agencies that Congress created. Now, our Supreme Court, the current Supreme Court, has gone ahead and sided with Trump over the last few months in his ability to do these firings. So there's been a lot of court watchers that say, hey, when this kind of case comes up before the merits and there's actually oral arguments on it, it's very likely that this Supreme Court will reverse that 1935 precedent.
Oh, gosh. Okay, I'm sorry. I have to pause for a second. They're off from June to October? What do they do?
Yeah, it sounds like a really good job, doesn't it? I would love to have a
Yeah.
3-1. Yes, it's almost more than our lawmakers who love to be home all the time.
Yeah, okay. All right. Voting rights, ballot counting. Are these things coming?
Yes. So you bring up some very interesting. So there's already one case that's scheduled. There's a dispute out of Louisiana. This one was actually argued last term, and the justices put off issuing a ruling and have scheduled it again for oral arguments. That usually doesn't happen. I don't remember that happening since I've covered the court in 2017. So essentially what this case is challengers have said that race was used when drawing the congressional map in Louisiana to make sure that there's two majority black districts. It took it from five majority, like Republican controlled districts and one Democrat to now four Republican and two Democrat. So you have groups protesting the use of race when considering drawing these lines. It's kind of what I would say like a reverse case. You usually see minorities bringing the voting rights dispute saying, hey, we don't have adequate representation. This is kind of the opposite, saying, hey, it violates the 14th Amendment to use race for drawing these district lines and that it was inappropriately done so by the state. So, there could be, I'm expecting a ruling in this one, definitely by when the court wraps up its term in June. But this would be very huge. It could potentially take a big gut to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which was used, to try to correct decades of political oppression way back when. So if they change what you could use race for when drawing these congressional district lines, Obviously, that's huge. It would not just impact Louisiana, it would impact states across the nation. There's also a ballot counting dispute. Now, this one is you're going to have to kind of stay with me on this. Illinois has a law where they're allowed to count mail-in ballots 14 days after Election Day. So federal candidates have sued, I know, 14 days, right? Not enough to, I guess people, don't get their mail out in time. So that was challenged by federal candidates who say, no, like this is costing us these election monitors we're having to pay for. We're suffering from that. There is one election day, and so we're challenging the state law. They lost in lower court, not on the law, but on the fact that the lower court said, well, you haven't had sufficient legal injury, basically what's called standing, to bring this lawsuit, that you didn't really have to pay these monitors that much. It's too early to sue before the 2024 election. And that's how they got rid of the case. So now it's at the Supreme Court on that issue. Do federal candidates really have the right to challenge these state laws? And if they don't, who would, right? So that's kind of what the justices will decide with this one case. There is a separate petition out of Mississippi dealing with mail-in ballots. That state allows ballots to be counted up to 5 days past Election Day. The RNC has challenged that. The Fifth Circuit had ruled that there is only one election day, basically striking down the Mississippi law, but let it stand on appeal. So now it's at the Supreme Court with Mississippi trying to defend its grace period law for receiving these mail-in ballots. Now, if the Supreme Court were to take this could change not just what Mississippi does, but states across the board. If the Supreme Court says, yes, we'll take this up, and no, a state cannot count ballots, 14 days past Election Day, there is one federal election day, then of course that would make many states that have these grace periods have to change their law.
Alex, let's get away from the Supreme Court for a moment. In Virginia, are schools funding abortions for children?
That is the big news out of Northern Virginia. So it looks like in 2021, Centerville High School, there was a school social worker, who must have facilitated at least two abortions for two minor female students. Okay. So took them to the clinic. There's some reporting that the girls were coerced into doing it. Maybe they weren't, for this. They were told they needed to. And there was a teacher who I believe that was confided in by these girls who flagged this, I believe, several times to principals and to school officials, yet it went unresolved. So what you have now is Governor Glenn Youngkin, who has ordered a criminal investigation into the school district, about whether these funds, local, state, federal tax dollars at the school were used to facilitate student abortions. Right now, we have no update. There's actually questions about exactly which abortion facility they were taken to. There's a lot of reporting on the ground happening. So it does seem like where there's smoke, there's fire. And we know these Northern Virginia schools have had quite issues with parental rights and respecting those. You can remember the whole bathroom incident with letting transgender student into the female bathroom. The one female student was raped, and the one father who was actually kicked out of the school board meeting over that. I think that everybody rings a bell. Everyone remembers that dispute. So yes, these Northern Virginia schools definitely need to have some sort of investigation, and it looks like that's ongoing with this one Centerville High School.
Northern Virginia sounds like hell. Alex, thank you. I appreciate it. I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.